we don't have much time. Sacrifice.
The Exmortis didn't just win. They erased the world. A plague of spirits older than mankind swept across the earth, devouring armies, crushing faith, and leaving only whispers and screams behind. Exmortis 2 doesn't tell a horror story. It drops you into the aftermath. The resistance is dead, their survivors are scattered, and you're being followed by something that remembers you. This is more than just a flash game. It's a slow death written in blood and prophecy. This is Exmortis 2, and by the time you wake up, the end has already begun. There's 3 events that happen in the series of Exmortis. What was, which is the events of the first game. You played as a man who woke up in the woods with no memory of how he got there. Wandering into an abandoned house, he discovered mutilated bodies, occult markings, and manifestations of something far older, far darker than simple ghosts. These were the Exmortis, an ancient legion of malevolent spirits once ruled by a powerful being named Lord Vlau, who had long been banished to the spirit world by rival demons. Their goal was simple: return to Earth. And to do that, they needed 5 innocent souls to be marked with their symbol, and a 6th to become their hand. And in the end, the truth unraveled. You were never the victim, you were the killer, the one chosen to anoint the sacrifice and open the gate. And so you did, ushering in an age of darkness. And then, what is? The world between the games. Over the next year, Earth fell. Billions were slaughtered as Vlau's army swept across every nation. Religion crumbled, governments collapsed, and as the last screams faded, only a scattered resistance remained. In the shadows of a dead America, a group of survivors formed a desperate movement, living as one, striking fast and saving who they could. Their legend grew, whispered like prayers among those still breathing. But Vlau heard those whispers, and he struck. Only one man survived, the character we now follow. He flees the massacre of his comrades, a dark figure tracking him through the ashes of the old world. And somewhere, deep in that ruin, another plan begins. And then what will be. That's where we are in Exmortis 2. The hordes have overtaken everything. Humanity is nearly gone. But in their final stand, a handful of survivors chose defiance. And in the shadow of their sacrifice, a stranger watched, not with pity, not with sorrow, but with a purpose. The game begins in silence. You're outside an abandoned church. Joshua Hannay standing alone where the resistance was supposed to regroup. But after the slaughter, he's the only one left alive. The air is heavy, and the church, once a place of faith, is now hollow and rotting. Inside, Joshua isn't alone. There's a presence. Not Exmortis, but something else. An unseen entity slips into the confessional booth. The voice doesn't just speak, it reveals something older than memory. A parchment passed into Joshua's hands.
Mr. Hannay, please sit, for my time here is limited. I take it the battle didn't go as planned.
Marked with cryptic, almost biblical scrawl. This is the prophecy of the hand. One night I dreamed. A darkness once dormant, patiently waiting, was now emerging from the shadows. A light growing brighter from beyond a dark chasm, wrapping around a pillar stained with ancient symbols. Millions of shrieks and screams engulfed me until I felt the burn rise from the floor, and it consumed me. My soul became a pathway, a link between the ancient world and my reality. Unspeakable monstrosities crossed over, devouring every living thing. And then he appeared, the ancient of the Exmortis, Vlau. He smiled as he crossed into my world. I saw myself, broken, tattered, but filled with power. A hunger to erase the light. I was, what is, and what will be, until a dagger pierced me. A mortal hand, and something else in the shadows. The pathway shattered, and my soul lost forever. I do not dare dream again. It's unclear who wrote it, or if they even survived. But the weight of this vision hangs over everything that follows. It's more than a prophecy. It's fate trying to claw its way through ink and blood to speak.
Get out!
This message leads him towards a new destination, a place called Lockerfields Ranch. But the Exmortis are closing in. These blood-red clouds twist in the sky, moving with an unnatural speed. And the time is short. After finding the keys to a rusted car outside, Joshua escapes, barely. The church disappears behind him. His next stop is the ranch and whatever waits for him there. The Lockerfields Ranch is the central location in Exmortis 2, and the site of some of the most horrific moments in the series. After the Exmortis cult had already wiped out most of humanity, this remote ranch, along with a handful of nearby homes, became one of the final holdouts. But even that fragile pocket of safety wouldn't last. A splinter group of Exmortis eventually swept through the area, killing the last humans who'd survived the initial wave of attacks 4 months earlier. And cut off from the outside world, save for a CB radio hidden in the basement, Mr. Locker realized the Exmortis were coming, and knowing what they'd do to his family, he made an unthinkable decision. He shot his 3 children, placing their bodies in a bed as if they were still sleeping. Then he turned the gun on his wife, and finally, after barricading himself in the kitchen, he ended his own life. His diary, found upstairs with missing pages scattered around his body, revealed the truth. On January 28th, Mr. Locker found an old leather-bound journal buried deep in the cellar. Every page was blank, but in good condition despite the age. He decided to use it to document their transition to the ranch, calling it a fresh start for his family. The property had been in the family for over a century, passed down to him by an estranged uncle named Charlie. They'd never been close, and yet Charlie's will left the ranch in his hands, with one final cryptic note: "Only you can understand the ranch, and if you can at first, you'll learn to." He admitted it felt strange to be living there, but he was hopeful. Anna, his wife, was hesitant to leave the city life behind, but seemed to be adjusting. The kids embraced the move right away, excited by the idea of animals and open space. Locker had work to do, but for the first time in a while, he felt good. This was going to be their new beginning. Not long after the family settled in, the men noticed an old portrait hanging near the front door. A man and a girl, unfamiliar and unnamed. Curious, he took it down, replacing it with a recent family photo from Christmas. The old portrait was tossed into the cellar along with the other forgotten heirlooms. But the next morning, it was back, mounted exactly where it had been. The Christmas photo gone. He searched the house, nothing. No one in the family claimed to know what happened. Then he found the family's photo again, shattered on the floor of the cellar. He brought it up in frustration. No one confessed. When he snapped at Zoe and Daniel, the children fled in tears. Claire remained silent, eyes locked to the TV. But determined, he reframed the family photo, rehung it, and locked the cellar. Key around his neck. But by morning, the cycle had repeated. The old portrait was back, the family photo smashed again, and he was out of frames. The portrait stayed, and he began to wonder if his mind was just playing tricks on him. On February 12th, the local sheriff came by, asking vague questions about strangers, odd behavior, anything unusual. When pressed, he admitted a nearby town had been hit, dozens dead, mutilated. He moved them out here to escape this kind of thing, but somehow it had followed him. On the 14th, the murders made the papers. San Raimi was nearly wiped out. 28 people gone. The article mentioned demons. He laughed it off, barely, but the tension lingered. The same day, he tried to open the sealed room at the end of the hall. The handle would turn, but the door wouldn't budge. He gave up for now, but managed to prepare a new room for Claire. That night, she'd sleep alone for the first time since moving in. Later that morning, he and Anna shared a moment of closeness, the first in a long time. She was beginning to settle in, but the murders, they haunted her. The next day, he woke up to Claire standing over their bed. She couldn't sleep. Said a man kept sitting at the end of her bed, staring out the window. He chalked it up to dreams, walked her back to bed, tucked her in, sang her to sleep. But as he passed the sealed room, he thought he saw the door cracked open. Half asleep, he let it go. On the 18th, another town was gone. Wiped out like San Raimi. He kept it from Anna, no reasons to add more fear. And truthfully, he was tired. They'd finally fallen into a rhythm. She'd become more affectionate, even lively. It was helping him cope. But Claire wasn't. She still saw the man on the bed. Every night, she hardly spoke now, just grunted, curled up in front of the television. And the horses, spooked, agitated. Something was off. On the 23rd, for a moment, there was peace. He and Anna watched the sunset together. Soft pink-red skies, unlike any he'd seen before. They toasted it on the front steps with wine. Just stillness. On the next day, the sealed door still refused to open. He tried everything: oil, tools, brute force. He was tempted to break a window and climb in from the outside. Claire had withdrawn completely. The man on her bed was no longer mentioned, but her spirit was fading, pale, silent, and tired. If it didn't change soon, he knew he'd need to take her to a doctor. On the 26th, another report. A new town, new hunter. 500 dead. The papers called it a cult. The police had no answers. A dark part of him was relieved that violence seemed to be moving away, but he didn't feel safe, just lucky for now. He clipped the article and filed it with the others. The sky had been shifting too, not blue anymore, more purple, almost bruised. The sunset were still beautiful, but he missed the light. If you made it this far, thank you. We tell these stories to preserve something, to keep the memory of these games alive. And if you felt something, or you want to see more of what's inside the game vault, consider subbing. It helps a lot more than you know. On March 2nd, he finally spoke with Claire again. A real sentence, a full response, something they hadn't heard from her in days. It was strange, though. Her bed looked untouched, like she hadn't even slept there. Anna convinced him to buy a gun. He'd never liked them, but between the rumors, people ripped apart in their homes, and the silence from the government, it felt like the only choice left. He'd heard stories, towns painted in blood, entire populations gone, and still no federal response, no explanation, just a wall of silence behind a curtain of smoke. On March 5th, a noise woke him up just before dawn. He grabbed the gun and swept through the house, room by room, checking on everyone. Daniel and Zoe were asleep, but Claire... She was sitting on the edge of her bed, wide awake, staring out the window. He touched her head, and it was soaked in sweat. She screamed, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the house like glass. It took 15 minutes to bring her down from whatever trance had gripped her. Long enough that Anna came running, and for a moment, just one fleeting second, he saw something move in the window's reflection. They moved Claire out of the room that day, back in with her siblings. Cramped or not, she didn't argue. On the 11th, Los Angeles and San Francisco were gone. The family sat huddled around the television all day, watching city after city collapse. Thousands dead in hours, entire districts overrun. The phones weren't working anymore. Anna couldn't reach her family. The networks tried to hide it, but words still got through. Creatures, not humans. Footage was blurred, cut, or blacked out entirely. He didn't know what was worse, the death toll, or the things killing them. The next day the president spoke. Empty words about justice and the American way, but it was clear. He had no plan, no hope. The military was losing, badly. Claire's old room became something else now, a war room. He brought a corkboard, clippings, reports, maps. It was half obsession and half desperation. He told Anna it was to know the enemy, but he was just trying to understand. On the 16th, a nuclear bomb was dropped on U.S. soil, over a city, over families. He couldn't believe it. One day of open conflict and the government hit the panic button. They didn't even wait. Joe, Anna's brother, was on his way. He'd stay in Claire's old room, if the house even mattered anymore. At this point, they were all just pretending it was safe. On the next day, he finds out the nuke didn't work. The word Exmortis started showing up on broadcasts. They weren't just killers, they were something else. Entire cities were gone, the coastlines were bleeding, and they were coming back this way. Joe arrived, he barely made it. He told them he got a call from their father, a single sentence, panicked and trembling. Get out now. They never heard from him again. Joe said it over and over through his tears. At least they were together in the end. Anna found a Bible in the cellar. She never used to pray, but she put it in the drawer by her bed and said it helped her sleep. He didn't argue, he just held her. On the 18th, Joe wouldn't sleep in Claire's room. He said something happened, but wouldn't say what. He had bruises, fresh ones, ugly, deep, and when asked about them, he dodged, deflected. That night they moved him to the living room. He didn't resist. On the 28th, Washington was gone. Air Force One never left the ground. The Exmortis had swept past the Pacific and were heading north into Canada. And east, always east. Inside the house, the air changed. No more plans, no more optimism. Only quiet and waiting. They had 3 weeks left. If the predictions were right, 3 weeks until the tide came back around. On the 31st, New York fell. Millions more dead. The last local TV channel still broadcasted, but barely, just static, footage, screaming faces, breaking news, more static. No entertainment, no programming, no escape. The sky wasn't blue anymore. By mid-April, the world outside their ranch had all but vanished. What little international news still trickled through suggested the Exmortis had redirected most of their forces south, into Central and South America. That brought the family a sliver of time, a reprieve, not a rescue, but it also meant the creatures that did return were methodical, cleanup crews, the last sweeps through the cracks. They stayed close to each other now, always, no room for distance, no guarantee of time. He admitted it plainly in the pages. Anna was the only reason he hadn't broken down weeks ago. Her optimism, fragile as it was, became a kind of shield. Something that kept the dark from pressing too tightly against his mind, but even she couldn't stop the walls from closing in. Not when the power finally cut out, not when the night grew teeth. Still, they adapted. On April 18th, the house went dark, and they fell back on battery-powered flashlights. Just one more way of pretending they were in control. Days later, Anna took it a step further. She began clearing out the basement, trying to convert it into a makeshift shelter. It wasn't exactly fortified, but it felt like something they could fight for. 50 miles out, the Exmortis had been spotted. Spread thin, but still moving, still coming. Anna believed they stayed hidden and stayed together, they might survive. He wasn't so sure, but hope, even second-handed, was still better than despair. Local families began coordinating, setting up CB radio air horns, last-ditch warning systems in case the monsters returned. And then, a flicker of something they hadn't felt in weeks, laughter. April 29th, an air horn blast sent them all racing into the cellar. There was fear, chaos, heart-pounding. But the call came through on the CB moments later, sheepish and apologetic. Dog. It was a dog. For the first time in ages, he laughed, not because anything was funny, but because it was still possible. Because for 1 second, they weren't just waiting to die. That was the end of April, a dog, a breath, and one last laugh before the dark months came. The air horn went off again, another alert, another scramble to the cellar. But this time, something felt different. Hours passed in tense silence, waiting for the all-clear. Eventually, they broke protocol. Radioed the neighbors, most responded, all but the Colbys. Joe, Bob, and the narrator armed themselves and made the drive. What they found wasn't a scene, it was a massacre. Karen Colby's body was torn in half and displayed grotesquely, her torso hanging from a tree in the yard like some kind of warning. Greg's remains were scattered across the porch, the children. He couldn't even write it out, only hinted at it. Whatever happened to them, it pushed him to the edge of what the human mind could contain. The violence wasn't just random, it felt deliberate, like cruelty had taken form and walked on two legs. That night marked a shift in him. Up to this point, he'd tried to hold on, for his kids, for Anna, for some vague hope of the future. But after the Colbys, he looked at his family and didn't see a future. He saw a countdown. He saw bodies. May drifted forward in a slow, silent haze, but by the 23rd, their food supplies were running dangerously low. No more jokes, no more false alarms, just the slow starvation of spirit and stomach. And then on the 28th came the choice that no one wanted to make, but everyone saw coming. They went back to the Colbys. He didn't dwell on it, didn't describe the smells or the bloodstains this time. He just noted that he and Joe salvaged enough to survive a little longer. He hated himself for it. But in the face of extinction, morality bends, and sometimes survival means returning to the grave of your neighbors and taking what they no longer need. That's what May became. The quiet before the storm, the shame of desperation, and the memory of limbs in the trees. June was the end. It began with silence, not peace, but the kind of hush that only comes before a storm. Joe came with rumors, a massive horde pushing west, strange clouds gathering on the horizon, and with them, the faint growl of thunder that never left the sky. By the 13th, those clouds weren't distant anymore. They were looming, breathing. The Exmortis weren't sweeping, they were cleansing. The narrator knew the cellar wouldn't save them this time. Nothing would. Food was gone, so was hope. Joe still believed there was a chance. He made a desperate run into town for supplies, but they knew better. He watched the sky swallow the last of the light and muttered his goodbye long before Joe disappeared over the hill. The next morning, June 14th, everything broke. The writer made love to Anna for the last time. Then he stood watch by the window, cradling the end of everything in his hands. When dawn crept over the horizon, he kissed her awake. She smiled, until she saw the gun. He didn't give her time to scream. Daniel never stirred. One soft shot and it was over. Claire, she was awake, staring blankly at the horizon like she knew, like the clouds had already whispered to her. He took her before she could speak. And Zoe, his little Zoe. She didn't scream either. She hugged him, believed he was there to protect her. Believed right up until the second he told her to wash her hands. And she turned her back. He shot her once, but it wasn't enough. He couldn't let her suffer, so he dragged her tiny body to the bathtub and emptied the gun into her until she was finally still. Then he wept. He covered them all, sat alone in the kitchen, writing words no human should ever have to write. Air horns blaring outside, screams echoed across the fields. Some human, some not. The clouds were right above the house now, and then, through the haze of grief and death and failure, he saw something moving. It was Joe, still alive, but too late. The front door exploded inward. The creatures were inside. He made one last stand behind the kitchen door, just long enough to finish this page. long enough to say goodbye. If Joe found this, if anyone found this, he wanted them to know he did what he thought he had to. He chose mercy over mutilation, and then he chose oblivion. The Locker Diary is the heart of Exmortis 2. It's not a mechanic, not a lore dump. It's slow, aching collapse into hopelessness. And I made it the centerpiece of the video because it is the Exmortis, not in the name, but in effect. This wasn't a story about monsters clawing at the walls. It was about what happens before they get in. The days unraveling, the things you do to keep your family safe, to keep your mind intact, and then finally, what you do when you realize you can't. The diary gives the Exmortis a weight they never had to carry in the first game. It shows the human cost, the way fear becomes routine, and love becomes something you might have to kill to preserve. It strips the supernatural away and leaves something worse, a man with no more choices. That's why we slowed down here, that's why we let June bleed. Because this wasn't just horror, this was grief, guilt, dread, and the terrifying silence of a decision no one should ever have to make. When the narrator took that final breath in the kitchen, you could feel the whole game exhale with him, and for a brief moment the player isn't just in a haunted house anymore. They're holding a worn-out journal smeared with tears and blood, and realizing just how far things have fallen. It's the quiet part that echoes the loudest. And from that moment on, after finding the diary, we're not just reading a story anymore, we're walking through it. Room by room, we follow the blood, the sheets still pulled over the children's beds, the silence is thick like it's holding its breath. It's not horror for shock, it's grief, it's weight. And as we move deeper through the house, solving puzzles and piecing together what happened, something else begins to stir, because this place has a history that runs far deeper than one family's final moments. While we're exploring the house, Hane finds he's not alone. Not exactly. He's being watched. The voice comes in gradually, first as a presence, then as a warning. And that's when we meet Xavier Rahayim, or at least what's left of him. Xavier isn't a ghost in the horror movie sense. He's a scholar, a victim, and a father. A man who's once made the same kind of desperate choices Hane is now walking toward. Back in the 1800s, Xavier fled into the woods with his daughter Gwen, hoping to escape a collapsing world after losing his wife to tuberculosis. But what he found instead was the Book of Exmortis, an ancient Aramaic text chronicling the rise of Lao, the demonic ancient behind everything, and the long-forgotten Dominion War. As Xavier translated the book, things began to change. Gwen stopped speaking, her body twisted under the weight of something else. She became violent, catatonic, and then utterly hollow. The Exmortis weren't just tormenting her, they were using her to punish Xavier, to motivate him. And Vlau made sure they wouldn't leave until the translation was finished. Eventually, Xavier broke. He believed the only way to free Gwen was to kill her. But death wasn't the escape. He condemned her to something worse, and yet Vlau got what he wanted. A full translation. When it was done, the spell broke. Xavier fled back to the world he once tried to leave behind. But he didn't forget. He wrote Vetus Hostilis Exmortis, and final warning and a potential weapon, a guide to reach the spirit realm and destroying Vlau's last remaining link to the physical world, the Hand of Exmortis. By the time Hane arrives at the ranch in Exmortis 2, Xavier's long dead, but his ghost lingers. At first, Xavier tries to lock Henry out of the truth. He seals the door, tries to warn him away, but when Hane presses forward, when he reads Xavier's journal, when he uncovers the depth of the Rahayim tragedy, Xavier recognizes the same desperation, the same resolve. Eventually he opens the path, because Xavier doesn't just want Vlau stopped, he needs it. For Gwen, for everyone the Exmortis consumed. Xavier is the thread that binds the lore across both games. He's the first man to truly see Vlau, and in many ways, he's the reason Hane even stood a chance. In the cellar, after everything we've seen, we find Xavier's work, the Vestus Hostilis Exmortis, the last words of him. Like I said, it's not just a warning, it's a weapon. In it, he detailed what he uncovered in secret, a ritual buried in ancient prophecy, the same one Vlau tried to make him translate. A fire, 5 souls, and 1 man to serve as the bridge. But Xavier believed the ritual could be turned against them. A dagger of faith shall sever the hand, reducing the scourge to fire, ash, and sand. This wasn't redemption, it was preparation. Xavier didn't just survive the Exmortis, he left behind the knowledge to stop them. In Xavier's old room, the last step of the ritual waits for Joshua. A blood-stained revolver left behind by the man who chose death over possession. The same fate now falls to Joshua. It's not in battle, it's a sacrifice. A weapon of fire takes a fifth of its own. He pulls the trigger and falls, but his soul doesn't die. He crosses over. The spirit realm is no heaven, just crimson fog, jagged stones, and drifting silence. A place where the time's erased and the purpose waits in the dark. There, guided by what little remains of Xavier, Joshua finds what he needs, a path forward, and the truth. Bullets mean nothing to the hand of Exmortis, only faith can sever the link. Hidden in a Bible that Joshua finds in the house, the last weapon waits. With its dagger, sever the link, and the demon horde will fall. The crisp blade. Joshua returns to the living world, alone, changed, and finds the hand waiting. One cut and one final act, and it's over. The bridge is broken, the Exmortis are cast back into the void, and the war ends with one man's fate and the knife buried in the back of a god. But salvation, it seems, is temporary. As Joshua steps out of the tunnel, he sees someone waiting for him. The man from the church. He thought he was a guide, a survivor, or even a friend. But now we see the truth. It's Vlau, the ancient king of the Exmortis, still watching and still scheming. He rushes Joshua, and he kills him. And then the screen fades to black. Exmortis 2 is more than just a sequel, it's a descent. Not just into horror, but into loss, mythology, and the slow disintegration of hope. What started as a man waking up in the woods led us to cults, possession, ancient wars, and the final unraveling of faith. We followed Joshua Hane from survival to sacrifice, from the ruins of civilization to the spirit realm, and finally to a confrontation with something far older than evil. And along the way, we read the words of the dead, diary entries from the last days of a family, the regrets of a father who killed to protect his soul, and the legacy of a man who tried to undo what he had unleashed. It's a lot. And that's why I told it this way, because Exmortis 2 isn't just about what happens, it's about how it feels when there's nothing left but the sound of your own breathing, and the slow realization that maybe the monsters were telling the truth all along. If you enjoyed the video, drop me a sub, it helps the channel a lot. Drop me a comment if you ever played these games, or if you've never even heard of them. I do these Flash videos every Thursday. But I hope you all liked it, and as always, I'll see y'all later.